My name is Pieter Goggins. I'm the founder of Pisces Atlantic and the director of commercialization at the University of Connecticut's Daigle Labs, where I focus on taking new technologies and introducing them into the market. You are studying at the Long Game Project. The bulk of my job is to identify promising research in emerging technologies and translate that work into business solutions. There's a lot of overlap between tech commercialization and business internationalization. You're right, they are surprisingly so, very similar endeavors. My goal today is to show you that some of the factors that we think are unique in technology commercialization and encourage those of you who maybe aren't ready or aren't interested in international work to consider diversifying your business at home by bringing new innovations to market. What is technology and innovation? The first question I'd like to raise is, what is technology? Technology is a lot more than just an iPhone, a drone, or any number of flashy digital tools that you use every day. Technology is any instance where knowledge is applied for practical purposes. In short, it is a practical innovation. As silly as it sounds, the first significant technology that humans discovered how to use was rocks. Early humans figured out that they could hit things, food, enemies, other rocks, for their own benefit. Primitive tools improved their lives in innumerable ways. It eventually led to where we are today. But hardly anyone would consider me a technologist if I was still breaking nuts open with a rock in my backyard. My point in this is an example that technology isn't always flashy, and it doesn't always come about as a result of really intensive research. Sometimes it does, and it has to. But like I said, technology is any application of knowledge applied for practical purposes. Oftentimes, it's stumbled upon as a result of everyday insights and then refined into a marketable product from there. Not all technology comes out of a well-funded lab filled with white-coat researchers. My second question is this: what is the root of entrepreneurial innovation? Innovation with regards to entrepreneurship usually occurs during one of the following undergoes some form of change: institutions, geography or climate, and available knowledge. Obviously, one of those three factors, the change in available knowledge, is just a fancy way of saying technology. One of my favorite examples of innovation has been playing out in slow motion over the last 20 years. It is something that you might be familiar with if you've flown a lot in that period. Airlines, especially in the US, used to operate on something called a hub and spoke model, meaning that if you were in a small regional city and you wanted to go somewhere else, you'd book a multi-leg flight to use one of the airline's main bases in a central city. So to make a Ukrainian example, if you were trying to move from Lviv to Odessa, you'd frequently have to fly first to Kyiv, regardless of where you were headed. You'd almost always have to go to the main hub in Kyiv, then reboard a new flight to take you to your actual destination, whether it was Odessa, Kharkiv, or Mykolaiv. But over the last 20 years or so, a lot of smaller airlines in the US realized that they don't have to operate on that model anymore. Regulations were changing, meaning smaller planes had more freedom to operate. Those same airlines were becoming more powerful and fuel efficient. And to top it off, demand for flights to and from those smaller cities was actually increasing more and more. They started flying directly from small city to small city, ignoring the old model where central hubs like Denver, Atlanta, or in this case, Kyiv, were the nucleus of the operations. The new model was way more efficient, and the early adopters in the US seized huge portions of the market share because they were far more competitive. I like this example for a few reasons. Firstly, it demonstrates a scenario where not just one, but all three of the three criteria for innovation were occurring: changes in available technology, changes in the institutions regulating airline travel, and changes in the actual geography. And secondly, none of the airlines who benefited from this innovation actually developed any of the technology that enabled it. It was all Boeing. The key highlights here are that by paying attention to shifts in the landscape around you, you can provide huge opportunity for innovation. And that innovation can occur using technology that you did develop yourself or you just figured out how to use better than anyone else. Developing your innovations. My goal here today is to help provide you guidance on how to bring new technology and innovations to the market, and to do so in a way that is both responsible and sustainable for you and your business, because it is certainly a process often as difficult as starting a new business entirely. Important to keep in mind is that are you looking for not just physical or digital tools, but also processes and organizational strategies, because these are certainly represent a large portion, if not the bulk, of all innovations. Start trying to recognize applied technology in that fashion, and it may become easier to recognize your own innovations, however small, as something worth trying to commercialize or act upon. Before you attempt anything else, you should try to document how valuable your innovation is any given use. How much time, energy, or how much money does it save a potential customer? How much extra value is created by this technology or its application? What is that worth? This will obviously be important later as you try to determine how to price your products or your services, but as a first step is an important justification for starting in the first place. Justification that you're onto something useful, not just for yourself, but for anyone you present this idea to. Another thing that I strongly recommend, and I've seen this topic addressed in previous episodes of The Long Game, so I won't carry the point too far, but interacting with your target audience should be the first thing that you do once you've decided on a new technology that you think the market wants. Key word here, you think. Conducting some basic customer discovery, as prior lecturers have described, will help you to avoid making incorrect assumptions about demand or price points and other things that could drastically change the value of your investment in this new product. The ability to obtain unbiased, honest feedback from customers about whether they would be willing to part with their hard-earned money to buy your technology is a key stepping stone in the process between ideating and executing. Ideally, you'll go back and forth between customer discovery and ideating as you refine your ideas based on feedback and evidence. Again, I know that there are plenty of resources in this program that have already covered this, so all I'll say on the matter is that I strongly endorse this one as one of your starting steps, particularly in technology commercialization. Okay, you have an idea, you're convinced that it might have some merits, now you need to define the scope of the work. Oftentimes, bringing a new product or service to market is just as difficult as starting a new business altogether. And as those of you who have started businesses already, you can attest things get quickly out of hand if you're not careful. One thing that I see fairly often when I'm helping founders commercialize their research is that they expand the scope of their plans way too much to start. For example, I work with a company that has developed an innovative way of refurbishing aircraft windshields. At first, they hoped that their technology could be used across the airline industry, servicing the many common models such as 737s and A380s right off the bat. The problem with this was that both the heavy competition and the need to immediately service various types and sizes of aircraft windshields. Instead of that, this company has avoided the trap of overextending themselves and is focused on a few niche customers, restoring the windshields of uncommon aircraft models for whom new parts are not an option. If you remember what I said in my last lecture, being able to focus on a small, underserved segment of the market at first is the key to being disruptive. It allows you to specialize and really serve a niche customer segment and then gain the traction needed to bring your technology to the mainstream market. A significant part of this is the effectuation process, wherein you focus on the resources at your disposal and figure out how to leverage those resources to attain the goals that you've outlined for yourselves. This is an ongoing process, and many of you have seen it described elsewhere as who you are, what you know, and who you know. In short, you're just trying to make sense of what a realistic outcome you can generate is, given the means that you and your collaborators currently have at your disposal, and generate realistic ideas on how to move forward from there. You could see this in the example that I talked about earlier. Through the effectuation process, that aerospace company that I mentioned was able to determine that they simply didn't have the resources, money, manpower, manufacturing, to compete in the broader aerospace market at that time. They had to set more realistic options of serving small, niche customers with the expectation that in the future, the calculus will change, and they'll be able to expand their vision with the new resources they've accrued. I find the effectuation process to be something that is really helpful for determining what is a reasonable series of goals when you're launching a new project in order to avoid scope creep and overextending yourself. Laying the groundwork. And now, about the 4 types of capital: physical, financial, human, and social. In my mind, physical and financial capital are interconnected and both largely derived from social. It is through your networks of social connections that you're afforded the opportunity to pitch your ideas, receive funding, and translate that into physical assets that you use for production. This is grossly oversimplified, but I wanted to highlight how important I view social capital in the development of other, more concrete assets. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Regardless, I don't want to focus too much on physical and financial assets because there are a plethora of resources to help you obtain those capital types. At Daigle Labs, what we focus on is growing the often overlooked social and human capital factors. From my last lecture, you might remember how much I stressed the importance of social capital in a new, foreign marketplace. Launching a new technology can sometimes be like a foreign market in the sense that it's a brand new world that you haven't worked with in that market sector before. It's a brand new world in which you don't know many people and are unfamiliar with the rules of the game and can stand to benefit from a more experienced partner. Leveraging your social capital here is, from my experience, quite helpful in allowing you to save time, energy, and money on common mistakes that a more experienced partner in that space just might be able to help you avoid. Here, just like you would when entering a foreign market, step back and think to yourself, who do I know who could be helpful here? Especially so if you're looking to raise capital and fund this expansion, it's extremely important to be able to present a board of advisors. Individuals that aren't necessarily your partners in the venture, but whom you can rely on for advice, guidance, and connections when needed. These people, formally or informally, represent the networks that you can rely on to give you an extra boost forward during the difficult process of taking an idea and turning it into a revenue stream. Human capital is another thing that is better off addressed during the groundwork stage, rather than on the fly when you're actually in the process of commercializing. The demands of launching a new product or service this way will likely tax the limited time and energy that you have in your days, making it harder to maintain current projects and devote the best of your intellect towards the hardest problems that come along with running a business. To this end, I recommend investing some time and energy ahead of time in organizing the manpower at your disposal. Make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 people that you trust and who you can delegate important tasks to, and empower them to make decisions in your stead if possible. By formally elevating certain employees or partners, becoming key figures in the management of your business, you're working to mitigate your future workload before it gets out of control. It is always easier to be proactive in this regard. Also, take note of the word I used earlier, formally. Over the course of field experiments that Daigle Labs has run, with over 15,000 SME businesses, we found that formalizing roles and expectations in a small organization results in higher revenues and profitability. We suspect that this is both as a result of taking the burden off the founder, making use of the human capital they're paying for, and by making those same employees responsible and accountable for those tasks. If you manage a larger organization with perhaps 5 or more employees, this is also where I would recommend promoting some of the best ones to be your lieutenants, responsible for managing projects and keeping less important tasks and concerns from occupying your time. The ability to empower others in your organization and delegate relatively important oversight tasks stands out in my mind as one of the most important differentiators between those who can handle multiple responsibilities at once and those who cannot. The blend of both human and social capital is, of course, formal partnerships with third parties, such as subcontractors. In this case, you're leveraging the resources of a different organization to supplement those that you lack, sometimes human and sometimes physical resources. My recommendation is this: if you do choose to work with subcontractors, which is often a prudent idea, make sure that you manage that relationship with great care. I think that making use of subcontractors can be a very wise strategic decision as a growing company, because it allows for explosive growth, particularly if you're limited by the physical means of production that you have. And you can access that for what is nominally a relatively small fee. But aside from that, these relationships are so important because with a subcontractor, you're paying a premium not just to have them produce a product or perform a task, you're paying for the sum of the resources at their disposal to accomplish that task effectively for you. In short, your relationship with them is the key to unlocking all the accumulated relationships that they have with their network of suppliers, collaborators, and experts. Execution. When it comes to the actual execution of bringing your innovation to market, I'm going to do my best to stay vague, because while I prefer to give actionable information, I also recognize that every go-to-market strategy is completely unique and I don't want to pigeonhole anyone. That being said, the first piece of advice that I have for you is to fail small, meaning make your mistakes at as small a scale as possible before doubling down and expanding. This means if you're manufacturing a new product, manufacture as few as possible at first, as a test, to make sure that everything runs smoothly. The absolute last thing you want is a huge bill for something that wasn't made correctly, or customers didn't actually want to buy, or to hire a bunch of staff to complete contracts that never actually landed. This phase can be called the training wheels or trial phase. It's where you practice each of the steps that you've obsessed over during the months of planning that went into it. If nothing goes wrong, great. If there is a snag, however, you'll limit the losses while still learning the same lessons. The other piece of advice that I'll offer is to be wary of scaling, as it is one of the trickier aspects of building a business. Founders are asked to simultaneously juggle more and more of every task at once, often becoming overwhelmed. If you find yourself here, you'll start to think back about how organizing your human capital may have been easier ahead of time. Scaling often results in a company inadvertently outrunning their production, financial, or manpower resources, leading to bottlenecks and sometimes even worse outcomes. The scaling process involves juggling all sorts of increasing demands on your decision-making, organizational, and resource management skills, and it's crucial to approach it with caution. One of the best way to view this is to view each increase in business volume the same way that you did when you were bringing the products you sell to market. First, make absolutely sure that there's a demand that you think there is, actually is, and you're not in some sort of a feedback loop. Secondly, go back and review each of the resources at your disposal, the human, physical, financial, and social capital, and make sure that you have enough of that at your disposal so that you actually can scale without running into significant bottlenecks. Finally, Make sure that you have contingency plans in place for each of those and ask yourself this. Do I have a reserve of funding or perhaps access to a small line of credit? Do I have relationships with existing agreements with subcontractors or freelance workers? Are my existing employees and partners working efficiently and without me having to micromanage them? Do I have a trusted advisor who's experienced in the scaling process? Having these contingency plans will help to keep you from being bogged down as a result of any unexpected problems with scaling your technology or innovation, and help you remain nimble enough to take advantage of growth opportunities that arise. Ultimately, approaching scaling slowly and carefully, expanding in stages, and seeing which part of your operations come under strain first is what I think is usually best. Careful planning, testing, and preparedness is essential for sustaining long-term success and avoiding potential pitfalls along the way. You are studying at the Long Game Project. And remember, knowledge is your profit.